Thank you. Okay, as I said, thank you very much, Stephen. Let me also extend my respects to elders of the lands we're meeting on today, in my case, the Wadawurrung people, and pay my respects to their elders past, present, and emerging. So what I'm going to talk about today, sustainable development and a specific goal, goal 3, linking that to the geosciences. So really talking about how well-being and the geosciences coincide. I'm presenting this. This is work presented as chapter 3 in a book, which I'll mention at the end. And my co-authors in this work are Rachel Martin, Singareri Florentine, and Dora Pearce. That's my copyright statement, which my university requires I include, just before I move on to the what and why of this particular talk. So, where do the Sustainable Development Goals fit in? You're probably aware that in 2015, the United Nations published 17 Sustainable Development Goals with some targets to go with them. And they set an agenda to create a more sustainable world, which was free of poverty and hunger and disease, and which provided peace and prosperity for all humans. Such a laudable set of aims, so huge, really, really huge. And once you get over the sense of that being a bit of a motherhood statement, and you know, maybe it's bigger than the platitudes it might be misrepresented to be, we get to some really, really tangible components of these goals. Effectively, it sets up a roadmap for a resilient future, and it does so by providing some very specific metrics. It's not as if this is the first time people have tried to put sustainable goals on the agenda, but this is one of the times it's been done most completely, and perhaps with those metrics in place. So we have ways of measuring success. That's not to say this isn't a big agenda. It most certainly is. It addresses things such as inequality, climate change, fires, floods, premature death, systemic racism, poverty, the like. It is huge. And in that huge vastness of content, it actually gives us some language to talk about how we could achieve those sorts of goals. And the language is important here because it aligns the way governments and NGOs and corporations and the like, how we can actually think about achieving some of these ends. So that language is important in that space. So I was approached to actually investigate Sustainable Development Goal 3, which is ensuring healthy lives for all members of society at all ages. Pretty big deal when you think about it. And probably the first question that comes to most people's minds, unfortunately, is why is a geologist playing in this space? What has geology actually got to do with health? And I think by partway to answer that, I think is my work in that medical geology field. And even though in some ways medical geology is a new discipline, in reality, it's a very, very old discipline. Hippocrates in the 5th century BCE actually wrote that if you want to understand the health of a population, you look to the air that they breathe, the water they drink, and the places that they live. So effectively, the environment is the thing that gives you health. It is the indicator. And that's exactly what medical geology looks at that interaction between the geogenic environment and human and ecosystem health. So I think that's the starting reason for why we took that journey of Sustainable Development Goal 3. One of the most exciting things about medical geology is it actually deals with quite subtle systems in a lot of ways. It deals with sporadic and low exposure to toxins and beneficial components as well. It's a balanced equation. The geogenic environment gives us the good and the bad. And it also takes into account biological variability. So susceptibility of individuals changes, it's variable. So we take that into account. But even with all the caveats here, worldwide, more than 25% of worldwide diseases are linked in a fairly direct way to environmental causes. So geogenic engagement has a very, very clear link, I think, with health and health outcomes. The geogenic environment is the broadest thing. It gives us everything. It's very easy when you say geogenic environment for people to think of the mining environment, but it's far, far bigger than that. Agriculture and forestry rely on the geogenic environment. You can't have agriculture without development of soil profiles and regolith, and that is a precious geological resource. Urbanisation, industrialisation, waste management, all those things interact largely on the skin of our planet, and that's that interface between geogenic and humans, and it has health implications. And some of those implications are just wondrous. Honestly, the prosperity that comes with us engaging in the geogenic environment are immense. Art, culture, leisure time, all those things come as the consequences of the rewards we reap by engaging with the geogenic environment. It is the positive story in this, in so many ways. In my own backyard, effectively, the Ballarat region, the financial legacy from engaging with the geogenic environment, it's clear. You just have to walk down the main street. The wealth that came into Victoria in association with previous gold rushes and current mining inventors are huge. Like all things, they come with other legacies, social, cultural and environmental legacies, and we may not engage with those today the same way we would have in the past. So there's a package of returns from that engagement with the geogenic environment. And that can be very useful in us projecting how we should move forward, as much as perhaps reflecting on our past good and bad practice. And in terms of, just before I move back into that health space, just to give emphasis to just how significant the geogenic environment really is. Putting that slide together, I thought, well, it'd probably be easier to say what the geogenic environment doesn't deliver, because effectively it delivers everything to us: food, clothing, housing, the warmth and cooling we get to try and manage our way through various climatic conditions. It gives us the air we breathe. Transport, there's a whole raft of things in that space. So the geogenic environment is critical to our survival as well as our health, the quality of our life in that environment. So that's the geogenic environment. This talk is also about health. And if you go back to the goal 3, the World Health Organization put some effort into coming up with some definitions that were useful. The definition of health, a state of complete, don't you love that word, complete, physical, mental and social well-being, not merely an absence of disease. That's useful as well, not an absence of disease, so it can be proactive as well. And wellness, not a hippie concept by any means, total physical, mental and social well-being. So somehow in this next 30 minutes or so, I'm going to try and link that geogenic environment to those sorts of outcomes, good health outcomes. Now, I have to warn you, my next 2 slides are text heavy. They are so for a reason. I'm just going to go through what each of the goal 3s look like, because there's targets that sit under goal 3. And as I'm doing that, I'm going to ask you to do something for me. When I talk about the health outcome, the target that's there, I'd like you to start thinking about, is that relevant to geology? How can I make that relevant to geology? And that's the challenge, and I'll come back to that towards the end of the talk. So 2 text-heavy slides, I'm going to talk you through them. So targets on the left-hand side, 3.1 to 3.9. So remember, there's 17 goals in total. I'm only dealing with 3. 3 is broken down into 9 targets and a couple of extra goals. Let's walk those through. 3.1, reduce maternal mortality. Not sounding instantly geological, but we'll come back to that. Number 2, prevent end preventable deaths of newborns. Number 3, end epidemics. That's a big one, isn't it, when you think about it right now? Number 4, reduce by a third premature mortality from non-communicable diseases. Oh, gee, that's big too. That's huge. Yes. Okay, I'll keep going. Number 5, strengthen the prevention and treatment of substance abuse. Okay, 6, halve the number of global deaths by road traffic accidents. Number 7, ensure universal access to sexual and reproductive health care. Number 8, achieve universal health coverage. Again, a really, really big ticket item. And number 9, substantially reduce the number of deaths and illness associated with hazardous chemicals and contaminants in all the geogenic partitions. So, okay, we got 9. Let's not even argue about that. I'll give you some good and bad examples later in the talk. But clearly, for us to take Sustainable Development Goal 3 and transform it to make it meaningful in a geogenic context, we're going to have to think about this. We're going to have to make some calls, and that's exactly what I think we should do. I did say there were 2 text-heavy slides. This next one sits under Sustainable Development Goal 3, and it's a couple of extra goals, A to D, that gives some measures of implementation of very specific targets. They do to do with tobacco control, medicines and vaccines, effectively making them more readily available, health financing and workforce. So again, a big financial ticket item, and emergency preparedness, when there are disasters hits. And in a geogenic context, that last one, I think we also have a straightforward role to play. So let me move on and say that I started this talk by saying the geogenic environment affects health outcomes and longevity. I made that as a bold assertion. I'm going to give some examples later on, but it's shown, the correlations are clear. Yet Sustainable Development Goal 3 really doesn't mention the geologic context at all. We're really going to have to make sure that we contextualise this well. And indeed, the World Health Organization talked about the need for us to contextualise every single one of the goals, that they couldn't be read in isolation. They need to be put through a lens relevant to specific authorities or jurisdictions. And given my original statement, the geogenic environment is important to health, it's incumbent upon us to make those links. And just before I go on to the next slide, it is important to realise in looking through those goals that there is a little bit of a flavour of some, well, big pharma about it as well. There is a flavour of some interventionist strategies, not in every goal by any means, not in every target. So I do want to be a little cautious as well in moving forward in here, because to be honest, health is big business. You can tread on a lot of people's toes moving into that health space. In 1995, global health spending was about $3.5 trillion US. In 2016, it's up to $8 trillion. It's considerably more than that now. So there are some sensitivities in this space about how we address health aspects. That said, I will not be daunted. It's appropriate for us to work out what actions we should take and what inactions we should avoid. And in that context, again, I come back to the geosciences being the perfect discipline in which to do this, looking at complex interplays of things, interconnected systems, geographic systems, geological systems, even genetic systems, societal systems, temporal systems. All of that is Earth System Science 101. Looking at interconnectedness is one of the most important things a geoscientist can do. So I'm feeling pretty comfortable as we try and unpack this. It is complex. It is important that we do this, and it is important we take community with us. Geosciences hasn't always had the most positive image in the larger community. Taking us to the forefront of sustainability and health has the potential to reposition the profession appropriately, in my opinion. So we've got some lofty goals out there: elimination of poverty, equity, health, and the like. We need to unpack that appropriately. And the thing that's on the line is effectively quality of life. Fair enough, nobody's getting out of here alive, as the song says, but quality of life and longevity are important players here. So the established link between environmental factors and a whole raft of diseases, which I will mention in just a second, it's there. We just need to put that out into the larger global context, I think. So things such as many cancers, diabetes, immune system disorders, neurodegenerative disorders, respiratory disorders, a lot of those things have a direct link to environmental factors. So which ones are we going to target at this point? What examples can I give to clearly illustrate that environment has a really big role, geogenic environment has a really big role on human and indeed ecosystem health? The first one is the number of deaths from household air pollution. This is a global travesty, to be perfectly honest. It's completely preventable. And what do? We're reacting after the fact. We're not preventing the diminishment of quality of life. We're not moving to prevent those health impacts when they start. At the moment, the larger community is worrying about palliative care. And this comes at such a big social cost, a big financial cost. Whereas if we actually moved to limit the negative environmental contributors to this disease and ill health, we'd be cost effective and it'd be socially appropriate as well. If you think about the number of people who die annually from unhealthy environments, this was a 2016 figure, 12.6 million deaths annually from these unhealthy environments, air and water largely. If we just consider today, and you might think, oh, well, you know, it costs so much. How could we do that? How can we get into that space and improve that? For context, let me just say, as of today, August 2021, 9.1 million people have died from COVID. And look at the COVID-19, and look at the global response to that. It is amazing what motivation will do for addressing a problem. Those unhealthy environments, those unhealthy geogenic environments are preventable and they're fixable. One such example, I just want to give a couple of negatives, then I will move on to the positives, because this isn't a bad news story, it's a good news story. One of those unhealthy environments is captured by this image. A beautiful province in China, quite some time ago, all the trees were used for heating, so it's a denuded landscape. People accessed a readily available coal. The houses, as you can see in that central shot, don't have chimneys. So people are burning the coal, which happens to have elevated arsenic in it, and inhaling that every single day of their lives. Every part of their environment is infiltrated with that particular element. Those chilies that are drying inside have elevated arsenic in them. The water that sits in the pots behind has elevated arsenic in them. So everyone in that snapshot has exposure to arsenic, which is damaging to their health. Just need to move on to the next slide. It can be small things such as that previous example really spoke to undeveloped environments, but developing and developed countries have problems in the geogenic environment, and it's not all linked to mining and industrialization. Overgrazing, deforestation has resulted in severe dust storms globally. Dust storms don't just inconvenience people. They kill people. They kill people in the short term with things such as asthma responses, and the long term, depending on the content and the severity, I suppose. Here's a picture of Melbourne in '83, a picture of Sydney in 2008. Dust storms are becoming more and more prevalent, and indeed they're impacting on our lives. And it's not just the fact that the dust has little silica particles in it, the chemistry of the particles makes a difference. I just wanted to mention, bringing it a little closer to my home again, in the Goldfields region, the dust itself has a particular added bonus associated with it. We inhale the particulates associated with mining contaminated material, and there are greater levels of specific metals in the PM2.5, the finer fraction of those materials. Those finer materials make it deeper into your lungs and reside there for longer, giving you a longer term exposure to these particular metals. This has two stories to come out of it, I suppose. One is health risk assessment on bulk contamination analyses are probably underestimates, but also we can do things to stop this happening. And we're a Western nation which has money. So there's no reason that people are adversely affected by that dust. Not to put too fine a point on it, because this has some, I'm trying to get back to the Sustainable Development Goals. 3.9 we've got. Remember, there's 3.1 to 9 though. So I do need to make a case about some of those other numbers in a minute, but 3.9, I think we've got. I'd like to take you to the next slide, which I won't apologise for, but it is a little bit confronting. And it's still to do with some of the negative effects of engagement with the geogenic environment. But rest assured, I will move to the positive ones after this. So this picture is a little bit confronting, I accept that. And to be honest, the negative impacts of a badly managed geogenic environment are confronting. They kill people. I'm sure you'll be aware of the stories surrounding arsenic in Bangladesh. And that's what this graphic is meant to represent. Bangladesh is a beautiful country. It has a lot of resources. It has a lot of water as well, I have to say. But in an attempt to better manage a suite of health issues, waterborne diseases, a suite of decisions were taken to put tube wells down into aquifers, and some of those aquifers had elevated arsenic in them. As the chemistry is something we could discuss perhaps at a different meeting, but nevertheless, what we did is we brought water to the surface, people cooked with it and drank it, and there was a whole raft of adverse health outcomes as a consequence of that engagement. So the motivation was very positive. The motivation was a health-based one to minimise the amount of surface water stored, so things like malaria and waterborne mosquito-style diseases and parasitic infections could be minimised. So really, really very, very positive. When we deal with the geogenic environment, though, we do need to be very cautious, and we do need to be very complete. We need to use all our geological skills, so we ensure that these sorts of problems don't occur again. A small amount of arsenic in your body processes. It ends up in the keratin, in the palms of your hands and the soles of your feet. Too much and you're going to have systemic problems such as cancer. And the poor fellow in the picture just there died shortly after that picture was taken. So there are real consequences of working in the geogenic environment without a full picture of what's going on. And that was graphic and horrible, but it can happen closer to home as well. And this is my last bad news story, I promise you. Back in the Goldfields, there's a statistically significant but small increased risk of a whole raft of cancers associated with living close to soils that have elevated arsenic in them. Again, once you know there's a problem, there are relatively simple mechanisms put in place to deal with that. I live in the Goldfields. I'm happy here. I do really quite like living here, and I feel safe here. And I think part of a geologist's role is to actually communicate information to people so we can make good decisions. So in that space, yes, dealing with the geogenic environment requires knowledge and communication, but you can do so safely as long as you know the risks. Now, I promised I'd move on to something a little bit more positive. Let me do that now. I think, again, I don't know, maybe 20 minutes ago, I might have mentioned that wellness word, wellness and longevity. This dealing between the geogenic environment and health isn't just about negatives, it's about positives. There is a huge body of evidence to indicate that wellness is associated with our geogenic environment. And remember, health is not just about an absence of illness. It is a positive engagement too. So contact with nature contributes to physical and mental health. It's a positive. And I've just thrown in a shot of the Flinders Ranges. Stephen Carey and myself took a group of our geology students to the Flinders Ranges quite recently. And I can tell you, it's a therapeutic landscape. It does you good to be there. Maybe the only point I'd bring into contention here is people call that green space. And I know words are powerful. I'm not sure I'd call that a green space. And I am grappling with words that actually encompass those landscapes that sustain us, that interaction with rocks and vegetation and soil and open skies. Perhaps sometimes vastness, maybe sometimes small spaces, but those spaces are therapeutic. They contribute to our longevity. They contribute very specifically in some contexts. So individual and collective behaviours are modified by being exposed to those sorts of landscapes. People improve eating behaviours, people improve exercise behaviours. So a whole raft of lifestyle diseases are addressed or at least mitigated by exposure to those very, very positive environments. And if I'm going to talk about positive environments, it's probably appropriate to put in a bit of a plug and a shout out to those people who are involved in geotourism and geoparks and the like. These are important places globally, even though Australia hasn't been the biggest player to date. And there's excellent evidence in those sorts of environments of improved mental and physical activity and engagement with community. So the social benefits are completely real. So I'm completely buying into geoparks. I have a very small criticism. I'd like to air that in this this forum. So perhaps we can even address it. I've viewed a number of reference papers on geoparks and their benefits, and I can tell you that they largely omit Sustainable Development Goal 3. They mention many of the others, and a lot of the others have to do with good water and fresh air and the like as well. So, you know, that it's legitimate that there are other goals that are mentioned, but not health. And it got me thinking that maybe geologists are a little bit cautious about stepping into the health space. And I'd like, as I started part of this talk with, is that challenge. Maybe we should embolden ourselves and actually move into that space a little bit more. And there might be some really good reasons why we choose to do that. I just wanted to also include this slide, the UNESCO website on geoparks and the like. It's really worthwhile sort of investigating some of the great benefits that actually exist in those sorts of environments. But also, if you just start on the top, what do you call them, running line across the top of that banner, building peace in the minds of men and women. I can't think of anything that isn't really such a direct call to people's mental health. So I suppose tentatively suggest that maybe we should start even thinking of one of the major benefits of geoparks in general might actually be health. So there's much more that could be said in that space. The geogenic environment, it's obviously more than a place to visit. We live here, and it's critical to sustaining life on our planet. It's critical to mental and physical health. And when you damage it, our health is also damaged. And so I think it's critical that we continue to use geosciences, or we try and move into a space where the geosciences promotes healthy outcomes. I just wanted to share with you on my next slide. This is from the social media feed of yesterday or the day before. That really this is more important than anything I could possibly say. Sustainability is more than just a goal. It has to be. This particular item for the feed, which I didn't further drill down into, says some parts of the world are now sometimes getting hit with temperatures that cause humans to simply die. There's a weather app they're advertising now warns you when it's hot enough to drop dead. How real is that? If nothing can convince you that our geogenic environment is sustaining us, is having trouble, and we need to invest in the link between health and geosciences, I don't know what else will. I've got just a couple more things before I go back to the challenge. I set us all to think about how the goals actually link to geoscience. And I just thought it was probably appropriate to mention COVID again, COVID-19, and how that's impacting on how we're realising the Sustainable Development Goals. And it is impacting. Current figures say that there's a diminishment in a whole raft of other vaccination rollouts. There is transfers of monies from particular projects to the other. There is concern that we will reverse some of the gains that have been won in terms of waterborne diseases and the like. So COVID is having an impact. It might have some useful lessons in terms of how we act to address some of the other sustainable development goals in any case. So it's not, again, it's probably not at all a news story, but it is having an impact. Okay, so what I'd like to do now, earlier in the talk, as you remember, I said when I went through each of the goals, remember we're doing with Sustainable Development Goal 3, 1 to 9, do these things really speak to the geosciences? And to date, I've probably picked out the easy ones, the ones that are clear. I think it's incumbent upon us to be a bit more investigative than that. So just in the next couple of slides, let me tease out with you whether some of the ones that you may not have initially thought have a geologic link, whether they actually do. Okay, let's look at Sustainable Development Goal 3.1. What this is reduce maternal mortality. On the face of it, you might think, well, what's that got to do with rocky stuff? There's a number of factors globally affecting maternal mortality. And one of the big ones is actually infections. Infections associated with lack of clean water and poor sanitation. That's in the geosphere. That's something that we collectively can start to address. I would assert that we have a role to play in reducing maternal mortality. Can I also say one of the other big factors in that space is nutrition. Improving nutrition requires us to work better with our soils, work better with our colleagues in agriculture, maintenance of soil, appropriate crop interfaces and the like. So I think we can probably contribute there. So I'm going to call 3.1 a win for the geosciences. How about 3.4? I'm just picking out a couple of them. I'm not actually trying to be systematic about this. The next one is reduce mortality from non-communicable diseases. I think we've got this in spades. Actually, I think this is a straightforward one. It's a bit like 3.9. Mortality rates links to cardiovascular disease, cancer, diabetes, all of those sorts of things. It's clear environment is a big player there. Get rid of contamination, make clean water and clean air available, and you're going to improve outcomes. promote engagement with the geosphere, and you get happier people. And happier people do live longer. So I think 3.4 is a given. And just to illustrate that, there's a whole raft of data around that mortality of non-communicable diseases. This graph shows a percentage of 30-year-olds who would die before they reach 70 because of these suites of diseases. And each one of these has a direct correlation to poor environments. And just in case you're now thinking, oh, she's just picking the easy ones, let's pick a harder one, not impossible, but a harder one. And this is addiction. 3.5 is addiction. An addiction of things such as harmful use of alcohol, food, prescription, and other drugs. And I'm not an expert in this field, so please take this as an indicator of the start of a conversation. The causes of addiction are very, very complex. Trauma, co-occurring disorders, genetic predisposition, perhaps, being prescribed addictive medications, a really big player in the US at the moment. The ranges of causes are huge. But it is also the case that economic and social inequalities and lack of an environment that is supportive of you are also major contributors. If we, and I'm using a small voice for this, if we engage to bring greater equity, and we've got geogenic resources to use to do this, we can lift the lives of a large number of people. Providing environments which are clean, where food is available, where air and water are clean and available for use, improves the lives of many and may have an impact on those inequalities and may enrich people's lives so that they could perhaps move away from a life of addiction. Now, I don't want to say it's clear, it's not, but I think it's important to have a voice in that space, because I do think providing richer environments for people, and by richer I mean diverse and clean and safe, is part of a geologic journey. And we can be part of that journey, not just one voice, many voices from many different perspectives. And I just wanted to just the final one in this before I go to my conclusion slide. Under the goal 3, there are a number of letter targets as well, A to D. One of them, this one, support research, development and universal access to affordable vaccines and medicines. This is a goal that's sort of a level up. It's saying the poorer countries need to level up with the developed countries so that everyone should have access to affordable vaccines and medicines. And you can't really disagree with that. You can't really. I don't really disagree with that, and I assert you probably don't either. The only qualifier or concern I have here is, again, it's part of that focus on affecting change after somebody has a disease. Now, that's not the case for vaccines, but a lot of the medicine development is about addressing the problem when it occurs. It doesn't really address the sort of component that I think geoscience can really talk to, and that really is that fix the environment so that people don't have to live with disease or don't have to have diminished lifespan. So I'm just going to go, I'll check my time as well. Yep, I'm just going to go to my conclusion slide, which I haven't called conclusion, I've called the pitch because I thought that was more honest. So what is my story here, I suppose? The first dot point, sustainability. It's a requirement for long-term planet habitability. That works for goal 3 as it does for all the other goals. We have a complex geogenic environment. Humans are complex as well, and we're looking at an interface, an intersection of those things. So we need to speak with an open mind, and we need to talk to many disciplines. The Sustainable Development Goals whole ethos is that we should use our geogenic resources, and we should use them wisely. They're for use now and into the future. There's no indication that using geogenic resources is an inappropriate or wrong thing. It's just we need to use it sensibly. So mineral and earth resources have advanced the prosperity of many in the past, maybe not all. The Sustainable Development Goals are about lifting everybody up, not just some special few. So I think we do need to keep that in mind as well, that the entirety of our population moving to a better place. So there's a whole lot of legislative and political stuff in this space as well, but resource management practices, all our laws and technologies really do need to evolve to be compliant with environmental sustainability, not just for the environment, but also for public health. And there's that component that when those things are working in concert, you're going to have equitable development across a raft of communities, local and abroad. And my final dot point is clearly a political statement, even if nothing else was, and I think a lot of other things probably could be considered political statements. Geoscience is core to sustainability and health. It just fits in. If we don't see the value of geosciences, effectively our geogenic environment is lost. And perhaps we are as a profession as well. It is incumbent upon us to make it clear that the geogenic world sustains us. We can't escape that fact. And if we do, you know, the outcome is unlikely to be very pretty. Because I don't really want to end on a negative, I think the potential for our future is quite positive. I do think the Sustainable Development Goals are a useful tool for us to move forward, but we've got to engage. We can't just let medicos deal with Sustainable Development Goal 3. As I mentioned in the beginning, this is all out of a chapter of a book. The chapter I'm allowed to share, you know, that there's not a problem with that. If you would like to see the chapter, I can send that to you. And that's really it for my pitch. Thank you. Stephen, over to you.